So getting this thing started, can you just give us a little bit about what Baystaters for Natural Medicine is all about?
Definitely. So, Baystaters for Natural Medicine is a grassroots community group that began just a couple years ago, but through our advocacy work has decriminalized psychedelics in 4 cities across Massachusetts. And beyond this mission of educating local leaders on our city councils, we also host free events so that people can talk about psychedelics, they can learn and prepare for experiences, they can exchange grow kits and learn about the mycology of actually growing your own mushrooms. We also host mushroom forages just to look for all those critters out in the woods too.
Hmm.
So we pride ourselves in just being a really wholesome community group that is also, pushing the boundaries about how we understand the war on drugs as a whole, because our mission is ultimately that, these substances shouldn't be criminalized. We should be helping people in need instead.
Amen. So it seems to be focused around education as a whole, whether you're educating the community or you're literally educating somebody that's in a seat of influence in the local government. It's just kind of like spreading the good word about these things and how much we've been living in the facade of the drug war over the years.
Absolutely. And education ultimately is political power. When
Mm.
district attorneys and even police are making decisions about enforcement, they take into account the people they know and the power dynamics that exist in their community. That's why, for example, with almost all drug crimes, they're disproportionately enforced against people in poverty and people of color. So there's places in Boston where if you're caught with a small amount of cocaine, your entire life can be destroyed. Places
Hmm.
like Dorchester and Mattapan. But if you're using cocaine in a fancy brownstone and driving a Porsche, if you get caught with that, you're going to be just fine. And so, a central part of our philosophy is that drugs are already legal in the United States. They're just legal for certain people, and they're legal for certain corporations to sell them to us. And so, if we build a mycelium, a network of people who are going to be bold and tell their neighbors, tell their friends, tell their lawmakers, maybe even some law enforcement officers in their network that this is beneficial, this is safe, it helps people, and that arresting people for substances more broadly is the wrong approach, then that is power. And you're not going to have district attorneys or police snooping into that type of community activity. And
Yeah.
regardless of what the letter of the law says, cannabis is still illegal under federal law. By building that community, we can push power and push the limits of that power.
Mm. Well said. I mean, yeah, we're at the point right now where the cat's out of the bag about these things. Like it's kind of like most people know. Most people are aware of the benefits of this, and now it's just a matter of kind of getting with the program, you know? So, how do you, what is, okay, let me back up a little bit. What is
Sure.
like somebody's first step to initiating actual political change? Like if somebody right now is listening and they say, all right, in my city, I want to make the change that the cities in Massachusetts did, what would they actually have to go about doing?
Sure. So our strategy is one that is really, really wholesome and fun. And that's not true of all politics.
Hmm.
Politics can be really depressing and nihilistic, but what we did in Somerville, the first city to decriminalize here in Massachusetts, it's basically a suburb of Boston, is we just emailed our city council and spoke from the heart. I had put together a fact sheet, but to be honest with you, having worked in policy, having worked for mayors in 3 states and different countries as well, if politicians made decisions based on facts, we would live in a utopia right now.
Yeah.
So they're a lot more like us than we give them credit for. A lot of them, especially on the local level, do have a heart for people who have lost their lives to overdose and the benefits that psilocybin can have for addiction relief. They have tried psychedelics in many instances, depending on where you live. So you got to give them the courage to step up and pass a measure like this by really speaking from the heart and having that courage to tell them about how it helped you.
Mm.
We're here actually to provide free materials to make that process happen. We provide free training in how to be a community organizer, because we really believe that we are going to sink or swim together nationally, whether or not we're able to educate and decriminalize before this becomes an industry that charges people many thousands of dollars for an experience that they could have probably a better experience at home with just a trusted friend. And so you mentioned that the cat's out of the bag. I certainly agree with that. And yet I would say there is a good 200 million Americans that know very, very little about this. And nearly a third of Americans are struggling with anxiety. And that's a recipe for disaster if you get legalization and desperate people willing to pay any cost to try to get something they think that will change their lives. And so for us, that mass education, that this is something that's relatively quite safe, that you can do at home with a facilitator through our network virtually for free, or with someone you trust and love after watching some free training materials, that's going to prevent a lot of desperate people from getting ripped off by this quote unquote legal industry that they might be cooking up the next few years.
Oh yeah. So you see the route going as rather than the whole like therapeutic facilitator legalization that's being set up, where it is like, like you said, thousands of dollars for a few sessions. You're saying you'd rather have just the freedom for people to be able to do that in their own accord, and going about that. So that's the thing too, is like, how do you get to that point? Because it's like, do you just decriminalize all of these substances altogether? Is that like the ideal, so people have the freedom to do so, without legalizing them? Like, because once you legalize something, that means it can be sold, right? So like, where is the like, what is the bridge to this ideal that you have? Like, how do we get to that point without going into the legal realm of thousands of dollars of legal fees and stuff that's involved with the current therapeutic model?
The first step is to understand what an ideal system would look like, an ecosystem would look like. For most people, having an experience at home with someone they trust, someone they like, a friend or a facilitator that they met that has experience with psilocybin, has experience with MDMA, is going to be the ideal model, because what you can do after you have that neuroplasticity from an experience is see your therapist the week after. You can go see a life counselor in the weeks following or preceding your experience and still prime it to be one that is extremely therapeutic. We have a crippling shortage of therapists across the United States for conventional mental health. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that wait lines are extremely long for the average therapist, and they're unable to get clients off of that because they have treatment-resistant depression. So we actually have a ton of therapists that send people to our parties and our events so that they can use psilocybin by themselves. The therapists don't have their, licenses or credentials at threat. They don't have to pay 50 grand or tens of thousands of dollars for some of these trainings. And yet their clients come back with neuroplasticity, and they're able to make talk therapy more effective. The alternative to that model, and I think the medicalized approach is here to stay, but I think that it's going to be a loser long run, is sitting with two therapists. So you're brain draining, you're taking away therapists that could be serving low income and moderate income people from all over the spectrum of mental health, not just those that are interested in psychedelics. You're taking those people away to only work at these highly regulated retreat centers in Oregon and Colorado, under a mountain, almost 5,000 pages of regulation about the types of mushrooms you can use, about how you can use them. I think that model is going to lose long run because it's really expensive. It's going to choke innovation. And right now, there's nothing illegal about me giving harm reduction advice on psilocybin and having someone do an experience for themselves and then go see a therapist. That's already legal. We just need to create enough power as a community to where police are not snooping about people growing their own mushrooms and sharing them. So, Gary, as an extension of the ideal, or what I think will manifest in the psychedelic ecosystem, mushrooms are not very expensive. In a lot of places, at most, they're $7 a gram. If you get a grow right, you can get 30 to 50 grams of dried mushrooms, more than, most people will use in an entire lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And the average psychedelic consumer is only going to use a few grams. Most people are not seasoned psychonauts. A lot of people are never going to try it at all.
Yeah.
So you have a very small market, way smaller than cannabis, where you're going to make on average maybe 20 to 30 bucks off of a consumer across their lifetime. That's not going to be enough to sustain independent dispensaries for psilocybin. MDMA and LSD cost cents to produce. The only reason that these things are sometimes expensive or charged for is because they are illegal and because it's hard to find someone who has them, right? So if we have enough decriminalization and we can trust that law enforcement is going to back off in a lot of areas like Somerville, where people are growing their own mushrooms, the price of mushrooms is going to plummet just like cannabis has. There's legal dispensaries in Massachusetts that are going out of business because supply is so high, because people just grow their own. So it's going to be very difficult to sustain a model for growers where it's a very profitable industry. In terms of the providers, if you set regulation extremely high, like they are in Oregon and Colorado, at the price point of thousands of dollars, the average American only has like $500 for an emergency expense. Most Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. So they're going to turn to people who call themselves a shaman. They're going to turn to their best friend's big brother who likes Joe Rogan. Like they're going to, turn to these other people. What Baystaters wants to do is we provide our facilitator network where we have trained people. They're compassionate listeners. They care about you. They're not in this to make a buck. And you can give them a gift to compensate them for their time, but it's not required. So we want there to be credible people that don't have to, pay tens of thousands of dollars for training, but can do our training for free. And that we're reasonably confident they're going to give great advice on microdosing. They're going to give great advice on how to make the most of your first experience. And then from there, the people we trip sit for, they're going to educate their friends and family and hopefully be their trip sitter.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Wow. Yeah, that seems it seems like a very realistic and a very positive goal. And it's not, yeah, like I said, it's not outside of the box really too much. That actually seems like how it should be. The only thing that springs to my mind is that within this society we have legal ramifications for, maybe what I'm getting at is like it only takes one apple to spoil the bunch, right? So you have this like beautiful system set up that you just described, and all it takes is for one person to really ruin that beautiful, almost utopian like essence to the psychedelic use. One person that takes a little too much and goes on a rampage, just has a psychotic break or something like that, and then that's when the legality steps in, and you get the headlines and you get the news stories about the dangers of psychedelic drugs, which is obviously it's obviously hypocrisy because we have alcohol that's legal, but that's a whole nother rabbit hole we can go down. But what I'm trying to say, it's a beautiful ideal to have that, and everyone should be able to grow. But then there's always going to be like there's always going to be, what I'm trying to say is like I'm on the same side as you. Like I understand, like everybody should be able to grow and should be free to experiment and do it how you want to do it. Like no other adult should tell you that you can't experiment with your own consciousness, but there's always going to be someone that's going to try to step in legally because of somebody that used mushrooms or something else that's like a psychedelic that is
Sure.
going to kind of ruin the party for everybody. So it's like there needs to be that in the United States, in the Western world, there almost needs to be these legal ramifications around these substances because they're very powerful and not everybody's going to use them correctly. So what I'm saying is it's going to, what's inevitably with that model that you outlined, it's going to like something bad's going to happen inevitably. And
So let me
go ahead.
maybe
Yeah.
kind of share my perspective on that. So
Mhm.
we actually heard this a lot when we had started our decriminalization campaign in Somerville and Cambridge.
Mhm.
And exactly 1 week before the big vote, a very, very high profile event happened. This high profile event has been all over the news nonstop for the past 2 years. And that event was January 6th, in which a guy dressed in a Viking outfit that looked fucking ridiculous and called himself a psychedelic shaman stormed the US Capitol.
Yeah.
He then requested that he only be given organic food, that he made all others lists of demands when he was incarcerated. And yet, when we emailed the city council of Somerville and said, okay, are you concerned about the fallout of this? They're like, no, because people know that psilocybin in general is a pretty mild recreational drug. It's a pretty beneficial compound when it's used with intention. That same week, Brother Gary, there was a guy who injected psilocybin spores into his veins.
Heard about that. Yeah.
It made headlines. Dude's clearly off his rocker, right? And yet there was no fallout for our vote. That hasn't led to recriminalization of psychedelics. I have a few other examples. There was a guy who, on a bunch of mushrooms in Georgia, actually shot up a whole neighborhood. I think it was in Georgia. And yet that didn't make national headlines. It made a few state headlines. And honestly, the media covered it relatively fairly. They're like, this guy also was probably on mushrooms. They didn't say that mushrooms causes this. And then lastly, the last example, and this is a really fascinating one. The House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, her husband, after getting in a car accident, a DUI a few months before, was actually attacked with a hammer right before the midterm elections by this very weird nudist psychedelic guy who lives in Berkeley. And I worked for the Berkeley City Council and loved Berkeley. It was actually where I took mushrooms for the first time. And I asked the city councilors, like, hey, did you know about this guy? Like, he seems really unhinged. And there's all sorts of weird things that were going on with the Paul Pelosi story, because it seems like he may have invited this really weird dude who lives in a bus into his home. We're not really sure what happened there. But I asked the city councilors, like, what's your opinion on that situation? They're like, yeah, like that dude's like unhinged. We've known about him for a while. And yet we are very close to decriminalizing personal use and growing in Berkeley, California. So this kind of black swan moment, you hear other influencers talk about it all the time, that's why we need 5,000 pages of regulation. That's why we need to criminalize ordinary people growing their own. And, oh, God forbid, sitting on a couch with someone else while they trip, is because we're going to have these black swan events. The House Speaker, the third most powerful person in the country, had her husband attacked by a hammer by some dude who's on psychedelics all the time. It didn't lead to their recriminalization. Q shaman, one of the most bizarre things that have happened in human history happened, and that didn't lead to it. I think that certainly we need to educate enough and try to get unhinged people not to do any substances. Oh God, methamphetamine, fentanyl, it's all already out there, and adults can already access these things. What you do when you have that much regulation is you allow that Wild West where people don't talk about it. They don't report people who are predators because they're afraid of the legal consequences. If you decriminalize that stuff, if ayahuasca circles can happen in plain daylight, where there's transparency, if there's a creep or someone's assaulted or something bad happens, you can contact law enforcement without everybody going, to jail for using ayahuasca. then that is going to create more accountability. If you keep it criminalized, you're going to have more weirdos able to get away with more weird stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the paradigm shift I think we need to understand how psychedelics will be introduced. And I say will, this isn't I said it's the ideal model, but I think it's the inevitable model
Mm.
because again, Americans can't afford thousands of dollars for this. People
Yeah.
can already get psilocybin mushrooms. They can learn to grow them online. It's complicated your first time, but if you get it right or one of your friends gets it right, you're set. This is popular enough among people in the know to where that is always going to be part of the culture and always has been the culture in the United States around psilocybin in particular. So I don't think it's an idealist vision. I think it's inevitable, but I think we can steer it in better directions by educating people and having a network of facilitators that's really affordable, but is also going to have training and, have real trust. Like you don't just want to be with some crank. We have really good people who have really good hearts. And I think that's really essential to this work too.
Mm-hmm. Amen. Yeah. Those stories you gave just reinforced the idea even more about education, like how we started this whole thing. Yeah, for sure. So I think from here we should go into define um what decriminalization really means, because would you say that is so what okay, let me back up again. What is the end goal of Baystaters? What is the actual mission? Is it decriminalization, which means it's still illegal, but you can't open up a dispensary, there's still regulation around it? Or is it actual legalization? Like, where do we see the end goal for this organization and your mission?
So our end goal is to, with as much resources we can marshal, with as many volunteers, we have about 2,000 to 3,000 that have taken action with us in Massachusetts, is to end the entire war on drugs. And
Mm-hmm.
what that means for us is that the nearly 200 people or more that are dying every month in Massachusetts from overdose, uh, now the number one cause of death for people under 65, that moral atrocity end. That we have alternatives like Ibogaine, that we're able to educate addiction treatment centers on how to use Ibogaine or counsel people on how to microdose to have relief from withdrawal symptoms. That fundamentally is our reason for existence, because I almost lost my brother to an overdose, and countless families have. And yet these plant medicines are very safe, especially compared to like medication assisted treatment like methadone that's still addictive, still has overdose potential. And so we just need to have enough power and educate communities and leaders that this is going to cost our cities a lot more money in terms of nuisance, in terms of people living on methadone mile and encampments waiting for their methadone treatments every morning, than if you just allow people to grow and exchange mushrooms, or you allow addiction professionals who are educated on Ibogaine to start doing those treatments with people who are ready to move into transitional housing. These are innovations that are going to save our economy trillions of dollars, our city governments, our state governments, our federal government. And the problem is you have a pharmaceutical complex and a bunch of people who just kind of have a complex in their own minds in general that think they're going to try to profit and squeeze as much money out of this as they can. And the way we beat those people is by just getting enough people to talk about mushrooms, grow their own mushrooms. And ultimately, Baystaters is here to, community by community, build that mycelial network and that power. There's a lot of cities in Massachusetts that we didn't get fancy headlines out of. They didn't like officially pass the measure, but we've gotten commitments in writing and in recorded public meetings saying it's our lowest priority. We're not going to arrest people for mushrooms, or we're not going to arrest people for minor amounts of even more harmful substances like methamphetamine, right? We've gotten those commitments even when we don't get the fancy headlines, because we're applying pressure and we're educating. There's a ton of law enforcement officers actually who are probably using psilocybin as well now
Yeah.
because frankly they need it some of the most. First responders have 6 times the rate of PTSD. When you win over the cops that this is something that's harmless, it's not causing a big public nuisance. A lot of police officers know that criminalization is just making their jobs harder and streets less safe because people are out living there because they're so addicted and seeking meth or seeking heroin, fentanyl. When we win that battle, when we've educated enough people, it doesn't matter what the law says. We've won. When
Hmm.
people are growing their own and sharing their own more and having good experiences because they're treating it with the intention and respect and reverence it deserves, we've won regardless of what the law says. And it won't get the sexy headline, perhaps, but that's ultimately what our goal is. Headlines help, of course. We've gotten quite a few headlines, Boston Globe, you name it, but that's not the end goal. The end goal is literally the amount of people whose lives we can touch with this education.
I see. I see. Yeah, I agree. So the end goal isn't necessary. You're not even thinking about like legal ramifications at this point. Even though that comes with the territory, you're just kind of want to just get the word out. And you think just getting the word out is enough. Like if you get the word out, enough people know how bullshit the war on drugs is, then that'll kind of it'll just play out naturally. Like these medicines will play their part naturally in our society, and the legal ramifications won't even really matter at that point. Like the law won't matter because people will know enough, and ideally the powers that be and the ones enforcing it, like the cops, will even know enough where it'll just become just a thing of the past naturally, right? That's kind of what you're getting at.
Yeah, that's a
Mm.
big part of the mission. On the other hand, because we have so many volunteers that are willing to email their lawmakers, there are things that the state government does need to do to right the wrongs of the drug war and make
Hmm.
material changes. For example, our coalition's legislation would help us finally automatically seal old cannabis records. Because it's been 6 years since we quote unquote legalized cannabis in Massachusetts. And yet there's still people who can't get a job and can't get housing because they still have cannabis records and would have to go through 10 or 20 forms and travel to new cities and understand legalese to get their records cleared. We think that's ridiculous.
It is.
It's absolutely absurd. And for us, achieving that type of material change is really important because it means that someone's going to be able to feed their kid better. They're going to be able to get an apartment to start their family in. And that requires the bureaucracy to give. I work for the government and I still don't understand a lot of government forms and how the government works. For example, our team is trying to understand how those records are even kept, and we're completely walled from the director. He won't talk to Greater Boston Legal Services. He won't talk about how the system even works so that we can have the coders with Code for Boston come in and devise a potential solution to make it easier for people to get rid of their records. And so you have these bureaucrats that are completely unaccountable to the state legislature and unaccountable to the people doing that expungement work day by day, that we need to, force by weight of law, by a directive of the governor or a directive of the state legislature to fix that. So it's not all about community change. That's the most optimistic note, because policy change in politics is really toxic and really difficult.
Yeah.
But if we're educating enough people, that's going to create a lot of beautiful cultural change through that mycelium. And then the second part of it is trying to fix some of the bureaucratic arms of government that are holding people back, because that it does matter. It's just it's a function of how much power we can build in community as well.
I see. Mm. Well said. So, to someone that has no idea about the benefits of psychedelics right now, right? How would you describe the positive potentials of psychedelics?
That is a really fun question. So, the analogy I like to use to describe a psychedelic experience for people is butter and bread. So, the butter are all of these amazing tidbits of advice you get all over the internet from gurus, you name it. Things like, forgive yourself, love other people, you slay queen, you name it. That
Mm-hmm.
advice. And your mind, your subconscious, your unthinking brain, what makes it possible for you to dream, your automatic responses to trauma, your subconscious, that's the bread. And so we go through life with this butter sitting on top of the bread. And, we hear all these things, love yourself, everything's going to be okay. Like when a door is closed, a window opens, all these great, you know, and advice about gratitude, about caring for others, it doesn't really sink in, but psilocybin allows that butter to melt into the bread.
Uh,
So it allows you to internalize some of that advice to break rumination patterns around depression. And then from like a perspective of the nervous system, a lot of trauma is stored in our body. So even if you're thinking the right things, you're going to a therapist and your mindset about life is pretty healthy, you're still experiencing fight or flight mode through your nervous system because your body is still acting out that trauma you've experienced over the years, whether it be, you were assaulted or maybe even just micro traumas of being bullied or treated as an other throughout your life. You store that in your body, not just in your brain and your conscious thinking. And so psilocybin, when used particularly with breath work and other modalities, can be really effective in letting some of that trauma go.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. I like that metaphor. I'm gonna keep that one in the back of my head. Just melt into the bread. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Essentially, they break the chains of our trauma, our unconscious trauma that we hold, and they're so effective, or at least they can be effective if used in the right way, like you said. So effective at doing that, and I think honestly, to a certain extent, we're all traumatized. Some more than others, in some in other ways, but we're all traumatized living in this crazy world. So we kind of need that more than ever now. Whether it's psilocybin, ayahuasca, ibogaine, all of these things, they have different experiences for sure, but they all hold that same essence, like you said, melting into the bread, melting into that those sayings of, yeah, love everybody, and the kumbaya aspect that are very, very high ideals for oneself, but we don't truly internalize it. And the psychedelics allow us to internalize it. And even if it's just in the experience, right? For the few hours, right? You feel the love, man. Inevitably, we all come back down. But I think it's from those experiences with a facilitator, with your best friend, whatever it is, in the right situation, it stirs up a good stew to really bring that forth in your life. Like whatever that ideal is that you hold, it really allows one to take the almost like lessons and teachings from that experience into the real world, and then thus become a better person. I really think so. I think it makes, if done in the correct manner, I think it makes people better. For the most, putting it very simply, it makes people just more compassionate. From my personal experience and from what I've read from other people and spoken with other people, it's only been mostly a positive experience in one's life. And to add on to the person that has no clue about psychedelics idea, because one person, I hear this all the time about people saying, oh, well, you're just trying to get high, you're trying to escape, or they see it almost like cheating the mental game to happiness, or whatever you want to call it, to peace. But it's not about that, man. It's about like going into this experience and becoming anew. It's like going in and then thus furthering your quote unquote sober life even more so. you know it's it's not about getting high at all. It's not about that at all. It's about really like furthering your your regular life so you can maybe find some kind of semblance or happiness, you know? You know, obviously, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The caveat I might add to the reality that it does benefit a ton of people. It makes them a better neighbor. It makes them a better partner. It makes them a better parent just by allowing them to tap into that childlike sense of wonder about
Mm,
the self, allowing them to think through old habits,
yeah.
to set intentions around their dreams and put their skills to use for others. There's a lot of great intentionalities that can be applied to psychedelics. But what I will say is I don't think psychedelics inherently make people better people. I think actually for some people, it makes them more arrogant. It gives
Yeah.
them kind of a guru complex where they think that they're all enlightened. And let me just give one example that really weighs on me doing this work, decriminalizing controlled substances. Bufo, which is 5-MeO-DMT that is taken from Sonoran desert toads, they're poison. Those toads are horribly mistreated. They're thrown in bags. They get parasites when human hands touch them. If they're not killed in transit or run over, they're thrown back in the desert and have less than a 10% survival rate. If they're even able to find, their families,
Yeah.
animals are a lot more like us than we give them credit for. They wanted to live in that part of the Sonoran desert, and yet they're taken for profit to create Bufo. And there's lots of people who claim that Bufo has made them a better person, that it certainly makes you feel really good. It's going to overload your brain with DMT. It's going to feel amazing. And yet, if your source of pleasure and spiritual fulfillment is coming from driving an endangered species even further to the brink of extinction and decimating a population that is precious to some of the indigenous people in northern Mexico, who, by the way, never even used 5-MeO-DMT. They never used the poison. They just really honor the toad. The toad
Oh,
is part of their creation story, but it was a mythology made up that it was an indigenous thing. If your healing is predicated on hurting other beings, that's just a great example in which psychedelics don't necessarily make you a better person. It's about the context, the set and setting in which you're using them. Another example is combo. So combo is an opioid that's about 40 times stronger than morphine. It's very powerful. A lot of the reports of young men dying, like for example, a Soul Quest is being sued not only by the DEA for not being a quote unquote real church, but also by this family because they gave a young man combo and his central nervous system shut down and he vomited to death.
wow.
It's very powerful. I mean, tree frogs have this in their system to protect themselves, and yet it was used by some indigenous people of the Amazon, like the Maztec, to improve their hunting acuity in smaller doses. It was never used as like a healing ceremony thing. That's Eurocentric culture reappropriating it. A group in the Netherlands, they're called the International Association of Combo Practitioners, makes a bunch of money off of this. When they train people, it has nothing to do with indigenous tradition, and yet they use indigenous, language and reference that all the time to sell this product that's frankly quite dangerous. And the way that the poison is taken out of tree frogs is they're very often held over an open flame so that the smoke irritates their nostrils.
Oh,
They're stretched limb to limb to stress them out, and they actually have sharp rods put into their noses and their anuses to get them to release this poison.
jeez.
And yet, people on the internet just put pictures of happy frogs,
Yeah.
and I think that just shows you that you can apply whatever kind of mysticism you want to a substance, but if at its core it's coming from a violent place, how can you possibly claim that you're all enlightened and having that spiritual healing? And that's That's why psilocybin in particular is so incredible to me, because
Mm.
psilocybin is offered by the mycelium excitedly. They want you to eat
It's
it.
the fruit.
It's the fruiting body, and it's very sustainable to grow, right? You can find versions of psilocybin mushroom all over the world. It doesn't just belong to one culture, although there are cultures like in Oaxaca that it's been a really precious sacrament to them, and it's really beautiful and important to learn about that history too, like Maria Sabina. But
Mm.
it really is a sacrament that's available to just about everyone, and it comes in many different varieties. And so I think that psilocybin, LSD, MDMA, derived from the sassafras plant, these are incredible innovations that don't require us to harm other beings. That we can source these substances in a way that has good energy. If you're getting mushrooms from some kid on a scooter that won't look you in the eye and is just in some frat, your experience is going to be a lot different than if you grow your own mushrooms, or uh, you're meeting with someone who is putting in the work to decriminalize them too. Someone in our network who cares big picture, not about making a buck, but changing the world. That energy exchange is going to influence your experience too.
Oh
And
yeah.
the energy exchange of spending a bunch of money to fly down to a country, in a time when we're in a climate crisis, spewing all those carbon emissions to go down to Peru,
Yeah.
you got to wonder, should ayahuasca be a pretty rare thing that people do? I think so, because of sustainability concerns. I really want iboga and ibogaine for us to mimic that in a process that doesn't threaten the shrubs of West Africa and lead to poaching. I think we can make it in a lab. I think it'll be really beneficial to scale it up that way. We have to think three-dimensionally about the systems we're putting around controlled substances, because it's really tempting when they make you feel good to just like gloss over that. And I think a lot of people do that. They think that they're these enlightened gurus, that they've discovered the world, when they've really just discovered the tip of the iceberg when it comes to understanding drug policy globally and even just in the US.
Mm. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, the darker side of the potentials of psychedelics, because it's very true. Yeah, I guess it really just comes down to like who the person is, the situation. It's all circumstantial, but it definitely depends how you use it. And I never knew that about the frogs. You've actually just you've enlightened me about that. I had no idea that they were treated like that. So that's something new to me. That's wild. I believe it, man. It's about the whole experience behind this. It's not even just like about the chemical induction of psilocybin or ibogaine or DMT, whatever it is. It's about the almost like the ritual that you bring to it, almost like the ceremony. It's about like the whole process. And yeah, if you're bringing that kind of energy to it, that's a bad set. Yeah, that's not a good set for the whole thing, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
I believe it. So, what do you think is the most ideal way to do this? With trusted individuals, by yourself, or it all depends.
The beautiful thing about psychedelics and just how they've even been used in US culture is there's going to be a million different experiences. There's going to be as many experiences as there are people.
Mm-hmm.
We have this dichotomy between recreational and medicinal. And I think we need to ease up on it, or abolish it entirely, because if you take a couple grams of mushrooms with your friends and go on a hike in the woods and experience nature, or you take a gram and you go to a Grateful Dead cover band or whatever floats your boat, tickles your fancy music wise, some jazz, whatever it may be, that joy that you can experience microdosing psilocybin, or even with bigger doses, as long as you're doing it safely, you're not a nuisance for the venue, that can be extremely, extremely therapeutic, just to have fun,
Yeah.
just to remember how much joy life can give you. And it's there for the taking. It's there for you to be able to understand and see nature differently, to experience synesthesia. These things are in your brain. It's part of your consciousness in your body. And that in and of itself can be very life affirming for people, and they can remember what it's all about. It's about reconnecting with nature. It's about loving on other people. It's about spending time with friends. And our culture tells us the opposite. It's about how much is in your bank account.
Yeah.
It's about going to a job you hate to buy things you don't need to impress people that you don't like.
Mm-hmm.
And psilocybin can just tell you, instead, let's be grounded. Let's have a good time. Let's live in the moment instead of living in a state of anxiety where we're constantly thinking about the future, constantly thinking about the past. So I think there's going to be a million different ways to use psilocybin the right way. For people who are doing it for their first time, I would say take it in a space where you feel really comfy.
Mm.
So if you feel pretty comfy by yourself, if you've smoked cannabis before and had a great time, you're probably going to be fine on 3 grams of mushrooms at home too. Turn off your CNN. You don't need to be thinking about the war in Ukraine. You don't need to be thinking about energy prices. You need to, just be at home with some nice lighting, some nice music. And we have a free little preparation worksheet that allows people to, think about what their 10-year goal is, what their goals are before they kick the bucket, who they're grateful for, the settings where they feel in their flow state, where they feel most at peace. And just even thinking about those things deliberately before a psychedelic experience, there's no telling what'll go through your head when you're on mushrooms. It could be beautiful shapes. It could be, you thinking about the future. It could be you just laughing a lot. You never know, right? But as long as you're going into that experience really grounded and thinking about the better person you want to be, then that neuroplasticity in combination with relaxing your nervous system can really change you as a person, like you said. So I think a great starter setting is maybe not at home if you have roommates you don't like or it's really loud, blah, 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 but just a setting that's comfy and with people who bring you comfort. Bring blankets, have some water, eat some fruits and vegetables leading up to it, have a light breakfast that's just like fruit, have some crunchy things like walnuts or almonds to snack on as you're coming down and in that afterglow effect. These are things that we teach people who are, coming to us for mentorship. Be the person that you want to be for a few days leading up to it, and at least have the intention to keep some of those habits going out of it. But I think we as a system, as people, need to think of psychedelics more broadly. I think venues should eventually be able to measure out microdoses for people or give people harm reduction advices. People are doing psychedelics at these festivals. They're doing psychedelics at concerts. Let's talk about it. Let's be transparent about it so that you don't have some kid overdosing on fentanyl, or you don't have some kid that takes like a 10 strip of acid, has the worst experience of their life, falls down and gets hurt. Let's have an honest conversation about how people use drugs for fun, because they can be very fun, and that's not a bad thing. We shouldn't be a culture that only thinks about these things in a strictly medical paradigm, because that's not how they're used.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. People are going to do it anyway, so it's like, why make criminals out of the population? It makes no sense. And to me personally, mushrooms, I like to say, it was the first few times that I've ever taken it was the most beautiful experience that I've ever had in my life. Like I said before, it's not about getting high. It's not about that at all. It's about just like, I guess, having fun, right? You said fun, but it's not even like, it goes beyond fun. It's like truly enjoying whatever is going on when you do it. It's truly just like feeling the beauty, feeling so engrossed in what it means to be a human being. It goes beyond words, to be honest. If you're in the right set and setting and you have the right foundation, the experience truly goes beyond words, and it's way more than intoxicating. It's not an escape like alcohol would be. It's actually whatever the opposite of escape would be. It's like you're getting more intertwined with yourself. yeah, one of the most beautiful experiences that I've ever had in my life, man, to be honest with you. And the fact that it's a Schedule 1 substance to me is it's a crime against humanity. It really is.
Hmm.
But yeah, luckily there's people out there like you that are changing the world, you know?
There's a lot of people, and
Mm,
you don't have to start a group to decriminalize psychedelics to make a big impact. At Baystaters, let's say you're in Hartford, Connecticut right now, or you're in Detroit, Michigan, or you're in Kansas City, Missouri. What we do is we're happy to send out a post to our network that says you just want to have some people over at your house to talk about mushrooms. And I guarantee you that if you're a good host, you get some popcorn to snack on, you get some treats, some lemonade. People will come and they'll have a great time. Do
yeah.
they need to be, all exchanging mushrooms and all tripping out together? That's not what a Baystaters event is. Usually it's a guided meditation. It's people who are really cool from just about every background you can imagine, just coming together to talk about mushrooms. Maybe they've taken them 100 times, maybe they haven't taken them at all, but we're here to help out because we have a platform to get people talking. We have an RSVP system where the address of the event's held confidential. We check in with the people, make sure they have good intentions for stopping by. And all it's going to take is people talking and educating each other and creating a little bit of community around this stuff. And we're here to help. You don't have to write your own measure. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. We give all that mentorship for free to people who want their community decriminalized and are going to work for it. It doesn't happen overnight. It
Mm,
doesn't happen overnight, but to get cheesy with you and quote Miley Cyrus, it's about the climb. It really
mm,
is. It's about the people you educate along the way, the friends you make along the way, because even if the letter of the law doesn't change, that's not how power works. Power works by making a demand on power, by creating an alternative to power, and by educating people. Because if a cop knows somebody whose depression has benefited from mushrooms, they're not going to be as likely to destroy someone's life just because they see them in the center console of a car. And
yeah.
that's our best hope for the future. There's always going to be these pharma bros who repackage themselves as social justice warriors and have all the right branding, $100 million in their budget to say that they're the good guys. But at the end of the day, they want to charge desperate people thousands of dollars for an experience that they could have with someone they love and trust on their sofa. And uh, Baystaters is here to stop them, and we're here to create a mycelium that offers a real alternative.
Awesome, man. Well said. Well said. And I think we can probably wrap it up at that, James. Yeah, this was a good talk. Do you have any last words, or you just want to keep it at that? Because that was a nice ending, I think. But if you have anything else left to say, feel
I,
free.
I think that was a good ending too. We can keep it there.
Awesome, man. Well, yeah, this was cool. Appreciate your time and effort with this. Appreciate your wisdom. Keep doing your thing, man. And the whole effort of Baystaters is it's not like you guys are trying to legalize something that is detrimental to society. Like we're just trying to spread the truth here. So obviously, like you said, it's inevitable. It's gonna happen. Like the cat's out of the bag. It's just a matter of time at this point because it's only. I mean, there's a dark side, but for the most part, it's all up. It's all good things that come from the psychedelic experience. And yeah, it's a beautiful experience, beautiful time to be alive to do this and share this kind of like um, revolutionary time with you.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, man. Other than that, wish you all the best.
Cool.
Thanks again, and peace out.
And Gary, do let me know wherever you release it because we'll promote it on the page so people can check it out. And we also have like a training folder that we have community organizers go to. So if you want links or anything to like shout out or be part of posts, just let me know. Just happy to do it.
For sure, man. For sure.
Cool.
Yeah. Stay in touch, fellow
We'll
Baystater.
do. We'll do. Talk
Awesome,
soon,
man.
Gary.
Peace.